Uh, scripture I wanted. This is the book of Jeremiah, chapter 49, verse 12. For thus saith the Lord, behold, they whose judgment was not to drink of the cup have assuredly drunken. All right. And that cup represents slavery, that cup of bondage and hardcore slavery. They whose judgment was not to drink of the cup has surely drunken it. Okay. The Lord didn't make you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans with the intentions on putting you into captivity and in slavery under the other nations. All right. When you read Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6, the Lord said he chose us to be a holy people unto himself. Okay. Above all of the other nations, a special people unto himself, superior over the other nations. All right. So we technically weren't supposed to go into captivity. We were supposed to keep the law, statutes, and commandments of the Heavenly Father, and he would in turn bless us. Okay. Which all of that's going to come eventually. You know, the Lord is going to reprogram us to be perfect, and then we're going to receive the blessings. You know, if one nation receives a blessing, then the other nation has to receive a curse. We can't all be blessed. Okay. All right. Kings have to have servants, and the Lord said we're going to be a nation of kings and priests. So in turn, someone's going to have to serve us. All right. So it says, for thus saith the Lord, behold, they whose judgment was not to drink of the cup have assuredly drunken. Okay, so it's no doubt that you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans went into captivity. You went into slavery under the so-called white man. All right. There's records of you so-called Native Americans and you Taino Indians. All right. Arawak Indians being shipped across seas to Europe, across the pond, to serve slavery over there in Europe. All right. And this is before the so-called Negroes came over here to the Americas via cargo slave ships. Okay. So we have drunken of that cup of slavery, of hardcore bondage. You know, I don't care what they're trying to do to change history. Donald Trump could sit there and try to take out all of the records of so-called black people being in slavery in America. You know, because he's been going or campaigning to get, you know, the history of slavery removed from some of these museums and whatnot. Okay, and out of literature. All right. But the proof is in the pudding. Slavery wasn't that long ago. It wasn't too long ago, man. 1865, I believe, is when the Civil War ended. All right. You know, so that's what, roughly 150 years ago, give or take, around there. You know, so you Jakes, you so-called Negroes have certainly had the experience of going into slavery. And we, like I said, there is literature on it. There's documentaries on it. There's movies depicted in Hollywood reminding you about the hardcore bondage that you went through. Okay? So the Lord said, I'm going to read it again, Jeremiah 49 and 12. For thus saith the Lord, behold, they whose judgment was not to drink of the cup have assuredly drunken. And art thou he that shall altogether go unpunished? All right. So now that it's known without the shadow of a doubt that we've went into hardcore bondage and slavery under the so-called white man. Now, is the so-called white man going to go unpunished for putting our people into slavery? Is he going to get away scot-free? Is he going to be acquitted of these monstrous charges that have been brought up against him? It says, thou shalt not go unpunished, but thou shalt surely drink of it. All right. So the Lord said the so-called white man is not going to go unpunished. He shall surely drink of it. You know, but these so-called white people, they're so uplifted with pride, they don't see themselves going into captivity. Okay. You know, and, you know, a lot of white people know that you grown up in a house with your, your white daddy, your white mama, you know, at that dinner table, uh, teaching you that you're better than black and brown people, so-called black and brown people. All right, you know, and you don't see yourselves going down. So you have this this mindset of superiority, racial superiority. Okay, and that's where all of that pride instills from. You know, you think you're smarter than us. You think that you're better than us. All right, and when that's not the case, and a lot of you people, you devils, claim to believe in God, but the God that you believe in is Satan. All right, and you believe God is white, and you believe that God is dealing with you, and that the dark nations are cursed. You know, but the Lord said, this is out of the Bible. It's the book of Jeremiah, 49th chapter. The Lord said that that he's not gonna let you go unpunished for enslaving his people. So, and you will in fact have to go into captivity, into slavery, right? Let me get this in the book of Lamentations. This is the book of Lamentations, chapter 4, verse 21. Rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, that dwellest in the land of Uz. All right, Edom are you Caucasians, you so-called white people. All right, you are of the nation of Edom. And that's coming out more and more, man. I'm starting to see that a lot of you so-called white people are starting to realize that you are the Edomites. Okay, you know, because reason being because you got all of this shit going on with Zionism and you know the Israelis, all right, and some of the things that they say in the synagogue with these rabbis, calling you the goyim, talking about you white nationalists, calling you the goyim, and they even refer to you as Edomites. You know, I check out this podcast or this channel, No More News, on Rumble with Adam Green, and he's the host of it, and he recognizes that the so-called Jews call white people Caucasians in the Western Hemisphere, all right, and even including Europe, all right, Edomites, okay, but guess what? You so-called Jews are Edomites as well. You're no different than you know these white nationalists in America and in the West. You know, the only difference is that you're the head of the nation of Edom, and the rest of the white nationalists are beneath you. That's why you so-called Jews run the world, okay? And that's why your own white nationalist brothers can't stand you. You know, you got the neo-Nazis and the skinheads and the Ku Klux Klans. They can't stand so-called Jews, right? Neo-Nazis and such. Hitler, which Hitler was a small hat himself, okay? But reading on, or read it again, Lamentations 4, verse 21. Rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, okay, you Caucasians. The Lord said, rejoice and be glad. You know, be happy, man. This is your kingdom, man. This is as good as it's going to get for you devils, man. You know? So you better live it up, man. You know what you should do? You should live the lifestyle of Jeffrey Epstein, okay? He's big in the news right now, you know, with the Epstein files and the way he was living, getting 3 massages a day, you know, from young women as young as 12 years old. And I'm sure, which is probably even more classified, I'm pretty sure some of them were even younger, okay? And that's just the massages, all right? We also know that he was popping them as well, you know? But he was living the life. He was living in the terms of Edomite, a good life, you know? 3 massages a day, and don't have to fucking lift a finger doing some hardcore work, some laborious work. You know, you got a lot of blue collar workers that you know work these different trades, whether they in a union or whether they non-union, you know, but they work